Now I know this has been covered a lot, especially in recent times, but this has become far more interesting the more I look into it. Because when it comes to villains, they usually have a unique quality to them that really makes or breaks them in a plot in the manner that they are used, work to perfection in some cases or utter failure in others, like the chameleon in Kung Fu Panda 4, the character that actually inspired this entire video. And this video is not really going to focus on her unfortunately because of how uninspired that film was too, and how it focused greatly on bringing his past villains back into this pathetic whimper of a cameo, where it generally will play into the last previous three that we all know and love. You know, why they actually worked the way they did and why this one didn't. Because these are villains that played an important role in the entire theme of their movie and Poe's own adventure that applied to his life in some particular way, but how they now ended up shafted for a hollow excuse of a story that is unforgivable no matter which way you spin it when you know they can provide more. And since many have pointed out the grievances and sins of that very character, I just want to go mainly back to the positives about what made the Kung Fu Panda villains work in what they brought to the table, what they say about the world and the individuals around them that we can learn from to be better and not go down a darker path. And that's why I think Kung Fu Panda worked best as a trilogy in this regard, knowing the information that we have now instead of what the plan was for like an 8-film epic saga or whatever. Speaking of villains in this particular case, dealing with body, mind, and spirit. Of course, the last one and the third one being the weakest, but still has something interesting to offer. Because these three specific things are what I consider what makes a person who they are and what Poe has to contend with to become the Dragon Warrior, to become the hero he is of this very franchise, with the dreams he strive for, with his immature attitude to become something more with each obstacle he faced away. Because the most important thing that matters in this whole franchise is in fact power, and how someone chooses to use it, for their own gain or for the selfless defense of others, no matter which way their life guides them. Where it's not some special ingredient that matters when questing for something you really think you are called for, but how it's who you are that makes you special, and learn about where life is actually valued the most from, compared to those who lose their way with the pursuit of one goal, where he has to find himself in all of this chaos with his friends and family that care deeply about them compared to those who were abandoned, another element that the villains don't have at all, especially in the case of Tai Lung and Lord Shen. Two of which I've discussed greatly in the past in other DreamWorks videos, being one of the best they have to offer in the villains department, with parallels to each other in power and to Poe as individuals with no real family to claim, people who want to find their purpose in the world, adopted by somebody else and raised a certain way to reach their ultimate end goal, where how you treat someone else also matters in that fact, with Shifu and Poe's relationship at the centerpiece with how he treated Tai Lung as that first villain, reflecting a mistake of controlling something he cannot change, where the ability to believe and have faith in one can change only if one is willing to commit to that. Such humble beginnings with Tai Lung being the first part in the process, the part of body. This is where he does represent the body being the physical strength and skills that have this determination to fulfill one perceived role in life. This is an excellent start for a villain because it comes from a place of good intention, with Shifu caring for this cub at the palace doorstep left there as those who birthed them did not want that burden, where he showed love like any other father would raising a boy, especially one that was so naturally gifted in the arts of Kung Fu that filled him with the belief that he could be the Dragon Warrior as his teacher Oogway actually named, giving him the name that did mean Great Dragon. This power and belief to be destined a certain way can influence how one can act, where it makes him think selfishly because Shifu thought and taught him to be that Dragon Warrior, that he never gave time to think for himself, and how this could be much more than its strengths physically, and how it only allowed him to narrow to this one specific view in his mind that is destined to do more. This is where body overshadows the mind and spirit in this case on what you can do rather than thinking about what you should do. The great example being his prison escape as his introduction that sell you on this great physical threat that you couldn't think a panda with a floppy belly could ever defeat at all, because he literally is that strong as shown on the surface. It is a scary force of nature that doesn't stop because of pride and arrogant egos that overshadow the inside, and why he was not meant to be as stated by Oogway, which sadly Shifu had to follow, thinking he was at the first place, but now can't because his master said so, solidifying the darker path he was taking and feeling betrayed because he wanted to impress his master and virtual father. That even though what was started by him was well-intentioned and he had the skills to show for it, the heart was already consumed by this darkness, not valuing what else a person needed because they thought that appearance alone meant it all, under the illusion of control of what you wanted rather than what others want. I mean, you do see this regret almost happen for both of of them at the end of their battle, where it really shows us that pride does destroy us, only seeking the best for what we can find in each other, but how it still is too late to turn back because he never really was there to care when he was rejected finally, only listening to what was told rather than being there for him to do something better with his abilities, to believe himself in a certain path rather than this predetermined destiny he decided in his mind, thus making the resolution the material answer of the Dragon Scroll. Because going back to Poe's perspective towards the Dragon Scroll is where we learn what the Dragon Warrior is supposed to be about, what he learns from the past of the current Shifu and Tai Lung with how you need to believe in yourself. Because again, his stature is contrasted with the brute force of a villain that is Tai Lung, which he couldn't match up and got beaten again and again throughout the course of the film, but how he never gave up and believed in himself and everyone around him. That the lesson he learned from his adopted father, Mr. Ping, was that he was special for who he was, saying that his special soup he created was really nothing special, just an ordinary soup being enjoyed for what it truly was, where the scroll was that same blank canvas showing nothing but the reflection of those who believed in themselves, and how Tai Lung can only see the blank part of it because he believed in the idea of the Dragon Scroll, the push for Shifu's original definition of the Dragon Warrior, all of which comes from a desperate plea of approval for an idea that was never meant to be, that hardened his heart not to be fit, where Poe finds the strength from within to finally defeat him and gain what he actually determined what he was destined to be in the Dragon Warrior, using things that others perceive as his weakness. That the lesson to take away from this very villain in Tai Lung is to trust in yourself and learn to grow. Otherwise, you narrow yourself towards arrogance and the denial of certain things, evident by his fear when he gets beaten for the first time because he thought he achieved everything through this one aspect of the body. Where the real problem is that you never want to alienate yourself from your family, as Shifu learned quite well, and especially Poe when he moved on to the next part of the journey with Kung Fu Panda 2 and Lord Shen. And like I said before for these two villains, they really have an interesting parallel in terms of who they are against in Poe while still being quite different, that they deal with power and with family in some form being adopted or real, and that their hubris is what leads to their downfall, and how Poe learns from that to be better than what they could be. But how this part now deals with the mind, and especially in the heart in this case of his backstory. This one comes more personal, as we did find out that he was responsible for destroying Poe's family in a genocide of the pandas to stop a prophecy that eventually came true. Again, coming from somebody pursuing something for himself in a material idea instead of what was around him, as he came from a noble family, all who were known for their fireworks, where that power was always on his mind when he first tasted what it would be like when it would be passed down by his father. This is where it shows us his first use of his mind, making weapons out of the gunpowder that he used for the fireworks in order to continue his future pursuit that only a psychopath would display. Because when he heard this specific prophecy of a warrior with black and white, he immediately assumed it to be a panda and led the charge to a genocidal massacre for the sake of it not coming true. That these very words, because of the path he was headed for, inspired him to kill a bunch of innocent pandas because they were that color. Which, thinking about that, is truly evil by all means, where his parents would absolutely abhor and reject such a thing. Which they absolutely did, while he thought they'd be proud of him because of the power that they had, trying to overcome destiny from happening while still not understanding the love of those around him, banished from the city and his family forever, and doing nothing but filling him with immense hatred because he didn't understand. We mentioned this at the very beginning because the soothsayer later in the film does tell him, after he knows he's too far gone, that his parents really did love him because they wanted the best for their child who was going to become their next leader, but how he allowed the idea of leadership and power go to his head to justify these evil actions no matter how dark it could be. Like, he wanted to actually expect his parents to be proud of him because he stopped a prophecy, but that was never the intention because their family was not that way. He allowed this darkness to cloud his entire mentality to end up this certain way, thus becoming a villain. Like, you can see this completely in his attitude, with the animation really driving into his insanity, driven in those eyes and the expressions and the skills he has with dealing with Kung Fu masters with ease, coming from such an intelligent technical mind that is very different from the physical power of Tai Lung that is much more threatening the more you think about it. You can also see his character similar in the matter to that Wu described Shifu's illusion of control, thinking that he's in charge of someone's destiny when he's actually not, in terms of how his path ends up fulfilling what was told at the beginning and at the end of the film. Arrogance being the tool that blinds us all, thinking that those like Poe are a fool to stand stood up to the prophetic words that are meant specifically for him, for his own defeat and his own hubris, reveling in the death of his family that he caused because he thought he was all in control. A same mistaken outlook that Tai Lung had previously and why they were defeated, with the rejection of love and the rejection of self. Yes, all of them do value taking everything for themselves like ruling China, but they do it without a heart, and how he tried to hit Poe's heart in the past but never redeem it himself to what he did to his own, his family who shared that love and rejected him because he did this very action. His actions reverberated in the same mistake, and now we saw in the entire film he tried to project the pain of the past that he caused himself to Poe's family because that's what he did to his own, and trying to make someone else miserable is a way that it makes him happy. Because again, after learning of that fact, he did show silent regret for those words that his parents did love him, but chose to continue causing destruction for his own gain, where he just never stopped, and that unfortunately consumed his soul completely and his mind for the best way to conquer all of China. And throwing that towards Poe constantly only further cemented his own unstoppable path of destruction, because he never forgave himself, unlike Poe, who did accept who he was living in the present, and that dwelling on the past often stops us from moving forward. That our minds are shaped by the current time, and we are only allowed to think on yesterday to remind us who we are today, to be better from where we were, choosing to live or choosing to die like Shen tried in his own defeat, pursuing tyranny and then finally accepting destruction. Where the lesson to take away from Lord Shen here is to not let fate determine who you are. Dwelling on both the fear of the future and the regret of the past is just no way to live, unless you learn to live with yourself in the present, where using love of what you have is just the way to go to further save yourself, unlike Shen, who chose to live by that fear and hatred that caused his path to darkness. And overall, Shen is really a great representation of a true villain in my opinion, even more than Tai Lung because of the technical aspect of it all rather than the brute monster strength, where mind guides most of your actions in both good or bad ways, and how most of what he chose ever since he was young was overall bad in all the ways you could have spun it. And that's why I thought it was brilliant that they chose the color red when he's in focus, because he represents the blood of his many victims and the immeasurable evil he has held within his own heart, where the heart is the main driving force in the internal spirit, considering that of the world beyond as shown in Kung Fu Panda 3. Something that wasn't the strongest at all and wasn't fleshed out like these two, but still alright for what it actually was, and more so than the chameleon as it does deal with the last part of the journey, being that of the spirit. And once again, Kai is a villain that does deal with power, taking the chi of others to achieve just that. That in some form, he combines the elements of the body and mind because he was a warrior who spent a lot of time trying to gain chi as power and the energy in the spirit, being methodical and trying to conquest something that can be a real threat if used right, where the entire problem with his character was the entire story per se, that wanted to be more lighter on the jokes, which has become too apparent now in the franchise moving forward, but how it still generally is not a bad villain by any means if you look at it from that angle. The theme, the music, his powers himself, those are all great ideas, where it still works in the grand theme of the movies to move along in one's journey during their final tests, the place being the spirit that carries you beyond your death, while still looking at past, present, and future in each film, just as much as body, mind, and spirit, having the best presence and themes to contrast it. But then again, it still isn't the strongest backstory despite knowing what they really wanted to go for in Oogway's former friend and knowing what it really takes to be one. More of what I consider an unrelenting force who takes pride in the thing that pleases him the most as a warrior, considering Poe's entire journey in the trilogy was becoming the Dragon Warrior, where you kind of can take back a little bit while also reiterating some of the strengths of its past, unfortunately also limiting what is also possible at a later time in the story. Like, I do wish I could say more for his particular role that can pertain to the spirit because it has the elements of him taking out powerful masters with ease in the spirit realm and trying to get Poe's chi with a fantastic theme and a serious threat, but how it doesn't really want to do enough either in the weakness of the franchise. Like, it's not there in its final form, but it's also strong enough to be there. Like, if you went back to the original scripts of Kung Fu Panda 3, this could have been the best villain by far with how he actually defeats Poe. Just an unrelenting force that is threatening to watch and is only there to take the spirit away from you. And I think that is perfect the way it is, and how it still fits regardless. Especially coming from a place that the dead usually dwell in a spirit realm and only look back upon your great skills to attain more power for the sake of it still makes it a great piece on its own and can be a decent watch. But the main thing to take away from all of this is the concept of power and how it's used within oneself to be who they are, with these 3 traits of body, mind, and spirit that makes a human, or any other animal in this case of the franchise, who they really are. That each, in their own distinct way in past, present, and future, from the high end to the lower end, still has something to carry oneself forward. Because even while you can put an element that might seem good to have powers and can change and make them the most powerful to upgrade a story, it still cannot work if the motivations and themes aren't there. The eventual problem that Kung Fu Panda 3 slipped in towards Kung Fu Panda 4, removing that entire aspect from its story that made the franchise work for the first time. That the reason I wanted to create this and highlight why these villains work so well is because of how it truly solidifies the meaning of the story and the importance of the hero, the themes and the levels it takes to get to where you need to be, in a setting that is also as beautiful as ancient China with such rich history. That it is just a wish that more people can see those facts, because that's the most powerful thing you can tell in any story, and if you don't do it, you hardly give any value for it to being watched, which I'm thankful that these 3 are great and deliver such strong messages that can resonate with you no matter what, especially if they are a villain. Well, rather than of course something shallow like being pushed down the stairs.